Marcus Williams had been planning this trip to London for over 2 years. The 28-year-old marketing executive from Chicago had saved every penny, working overtime shifts and skipping expensive dinners just to afford this dream vacation. He wanted to see everything: Big Ben, the Tower Bridge, and most importantly, Buckingham Palace with its famous royal guards. The morning of July 15th started like any other tourist day. Marcus woke up in his small hotel room near Paddington Station, grabbed a quick breakfast, and headed straight to the palace. He had his camera ready, his guidebook tucked under his arm, and a large coffee from a nearby cafe to keep him energized for the long day of sightseeing ahead. The summer sun was already warming the London streets as Marcus joined the crowd of tourists gathering outside the palace gates. Everyone was there for the same reason: to catch a glimpse of the changing of the guard ceremony and to get that perfect photo with the stoic royal guards in their iconic red uniforms and towering black bearskin hats. Marcus positioned himself near the front of the crowd, his excitement building as he watched the motionless guard standing at attention. The guard's name was Sergeant James Morrison, though Marcus didn't know this. What Marcus saw was simply a man dressed like a toy soldier, standing perfectly still, staring straight ahead with no expression on his face. "They really don't move at all, do they?" Marcus whispered to a fellow tourist standing beside him, a middle-aged woman from Germany who was equally fascinated by the spectacle. "I heard they're not allowed to react to anything," she whispered back. "People try all sorts of things to make them laugh or move, but they just stand there like statues." This comment planted a seed in Marcus's mind. He had always been the class clown back in high school and college. His friends knew him as the guy who would do anything for a laugh, sometimes without thinking through the consequences. As he sipped his coffee and watched more tourists take selfies with the unmoving guard, an idea began to form. Marcus pulled out his phone and started recording a video. "Hey everyone back home," he said quietly into the camera. "I'm here at Buckingham Palace, and I'm about to test just how professional these guards really are. Watch this." The coffee in his hand was still warm, a large cappuccino with extra foam. Marcus looked around to make sure he had a good audience of fellow tourists, many of whom had their own cameras ready. He wanted this moment to be captured from every angle. In his mind, this would be the ultimate vacation story, the time he made a royal guard break character. What Marcus didn't realize was that Sergeant Morrison had been standing guard for nearly 2 hours already. The 35-year-old career soldier had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and had been part of the Queen's Guard for over 5 years. He had seen every kind of tourist behavior imaginable, people making faces, telling jokes, even trying to touch his uniform. But he had never experienced what was about to happen. Marcus stepped closer to the guard, his phone still recording. "Excuse me, sir," he said loudly enough for other tourists to hear. "You look like you could use a drink. It's pretty hot out here today." Some tourists chuckled, thinking Marcus was just making conversation. But Sergeant Morrison, trained to ignore all distractions, continued staring straight ahead, his rifle held firmly at his side, his expression unchanged. That's when Marcus made the decision that would change everything. Without warning, he lifted his coffee cup and tossed the entire contents directly at the guard's face and uniform. The hot liquid splashed across Sergeant Morrison's red tunic, dripped from his bearskin hat, and stained his white gloves. For a moment, the entire area fell silent. Other tourists gasped, some laughing nervously, while others looked on in shock. Marcus stood there with his empty coffee cup, grinning at his phone camera, completely unaware of the gravity of what he had just done. Sergeant Morrison remained perfectly still for exactly 3 seconds. Then, something unprecedented happened. Despite years of training to remain motionless regardless of provocation, despite his commitment to the crown and his duty as a royal guard, Sergeant Morrison slowly turned his head to look directly at Marcus. The tourist's grin faded as he met the guard's eyes. What he saw there wasn't anger or even surprise. It was something much more unsettling. A cold, calculating look that seemed to pierce right through him. The guard's face remained expressionless, but his eyes held a darkness that Marcus had never encountered before. "Oh," Marcus stammered, suddenly realizing that his joke might not have been as harmless as he thought. I was just..." But Sergeant Morrison said nothing. He simply stared at Marcus for several more seconds before slowly turning his head back to its original position, once again becoming a statue. Coffee continued to drip from his uniform onto the pavement below. The other tourists began to disperse, some muttering disapproval, others hurrying away as if they didn't want to be associated with what had just happened. Marcus found himself standing almost alone in front of the guard, still holding his empty coffee cup, feeling increasingly uncomfortable under the weight of what he had done. A security officer appeared, seemingly from nowhere, walking briskly toward Marcus. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me," the officer said firmly but quietly. Marcus's heart began to race. "Look, it was just a joke," he said, his voice higher than usual. "I didn't mean any harm. I'm just a tourist." The security officer, a stern-looking man in his 50s, gestured toward a side entrance. "We need to discuss this incident, sir. Please follow me." As Marcus was led away, he glanced back at Sergeant Morrison one last time. The guard remained motionless, but Marcus could swear he felt those cold eyes following him, even though the guard was staring straight ahead. Coffee stains marked his red uniform like dark wounds, a visible reminder of Marcus's thoughtless act. The security office was small and windowless, located somewhere in the maze of administrative buildings connected to the palace grounds. Marcus sat in a hard plastic chair, while the security officer made several phone calls, speaking in hushed tones about the incident and protocol violations. "Am I in trouble?" Marcus finally asked when the officer hung up the phone. The man looked at him seriously. "Sir, you've just assaulted a member of Her Majesty's Guard. This isn't a trivial matter." The word assault hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had thought of it as a harmless prank, a funny story to tell his friends back home. The reality of his situation was beginning to sink in, and it was far more serious than he had ever imagined. The interrogation room felt smaller with each passing minute. Marcus had been sitting there for nearly 3 hours, answering the same questions over and over again. Detective Inspector Sarah Collins, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s, had taken over from the palace security officer, and her line of questioning was becoming increasingly intense. "Mr. Williams," Detective Collins said, reviewing her notes, "you claim this was just a harmless prank, but I need you to understand something. Sergeant Morrison isn't just any soldier. He's part of an elite unit responsible for protecting the royal family. What you did could be interpreted as a direct threat." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "But it was just coffee. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I didn't even know his name until you told me." "That's exactly the problem," the detective replied. "You acted without thinking, without considering the consequences. Do you have any idea what kind of security protocols you've triggered?" Marcus shook his head, feeling increasingly sick to his stomach. Through the small window in the room, he could see armed police officers stationed in the courtyard outside. He hadn't noticed them when he first arrived at the palace that morning, but now they seemed to be everywhere. Detective Collins leaned forward. "Let me explain what's happening right now, Mr. Williams. Your little stunt has been reported up the chain of command. Palace security is reviewing CCTV footage from multiple angles. Your fingerprints are being processed, and most concerning of all, Sergeant Morrison has requested to speak with you personally." "He wants to talk to me?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's highly unusual," Detective Collins continued. "In his 5 years of service, Sergeant Morrison has never requested to meet with anyone who's caused an incident during his guard duty. Never. His commanding officers are quite puzzled by this request. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. There was something about the way the detective emphasized the word never that made him deeply uncomfortable. He remembered the look in the guard's eyes, that cold, calculating stare that seemed to see right through him. What does he want to talk about? Marcus asked. We don't know, but his request has been approved. You'll be meeting with him in 30 minutes. The waiting was torture. Marcus was moved to a different room, this one with better lighting but somehow even more intimidating. It looked like a formal meeting room, with a long wooden table and several chairs. 2 security cameras were mounted in opposite corners, their red lights blinking steadily. When the door finally opened, Marcus expected to see Sergeant Morrison in casual clothes, perhaps looking more approachable out of his formal guard uniform. Instead, the man who entered was still in full dress, though he had clearly changed into a fresh uniform. The coffee stains were gone, but Marcus could still picture exactly where they had been. Sergeant Morrison was taller than Marcus remembered, probably around 6 feet 3 inches, with broad shoulders and the bearing of a man accustomed to command. His face was clean-shaven and angular, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He moved with the precise, controlled movements of someone who had spent years in military service. "Mr. Williams," Sergeant Morrison said, his voice calm and measured. He took the seat directly across from Marcus at the table. "I understand you wanted to test my professionalism today." Marcus opened his mouth to apologize, but the guard raised a hand to stop him. "Please let me speak first," Morrison continued. "I've been thinking about our encounter for the past few hours, and I believe you deserve to understand exactly what you've done." The room fell silent, except for the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Marcus waited, his heart pounding in his chest. "You see, Mr. Williams, what happened today wasn't just a prank between strangers. It was a violation of something sacred. When I put on this uniform, I take an oath to protect the crown and everything it represents. That uniform you stained with your coffee isn't just clothing. It's a symbol of duty, honor, and sacrifice." Morrison's voice remained calm, but there was an intensity behind his words that made Marcus want to shrink into his chair. "But more than that," the guard continued, "you made a choice to humiliate me in front of dozens of people, to treat me like an object rather than a human being. You recorded it on your phone, thinking it would be amusing to share with your friends back home." Marcus felt his face flush with shame. I didn't think of it that way. I'm sorry." "I'm sure you are sorry now," Morrison replied. "But I wonder, would you be sorry if there had been no consequences? If you had simply walked away and posted that video online for laughs?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Marcus realized he didn't have a good answer. "Here's what's going to happen, Mr. Williams," Morrison said, leaning forward slightly. "You're going to face formal charges for assault on a public officer. That's a serious offense here in the UK, carrying potential jail time and a permanent criminal record. Your tourist visa will likely be revoked, and you'll be banned from entering the country again." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "But surely, it was just coffee." "Just coffee," Morrison repeated softly. "Tell me, Mr. Williams, do you have a job back home?" "Yes, I work in marketing for a software company." "And what do you think your employer will say when they discover you've been arrested for assaulting a royal guard? What will your family think when they see the news reports?" Marcus hadn't even considered this possibility. In the age of social media and instant news, stories like this could spread around the world in hours. He imagined his parents watching the evening news and seeing their son's face as he was led away in handcuffs. "Please," Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly. "There has to be something I can do, some way to make this right." Sergeant Morrison studied him for a long moment. "There might be," he said finally. "But it would require you to truly understand the gravity of what you've done, and to make a genuine effort to repair the damage. Marcus nodded eagerly. Yes, anything. I'll do whatever it takes. I haven't told you what I'm thinking yet, Morrison said with the slightest hint of a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You might not be so eager once you hear it. The guard reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He placed it on the table between them, but didn't unfold it. This is a list of conditions, Mr. Williams. If you agree to all of them, I'll speak to my commanding officers about reducing the charges. If you refuse, or if you fail to complete any single item on this list, the full weight of the law will come down on you. Marcus stared at the folded paper as if it were a venomous snake. What kind of conditions? Open it and see. With trembling hands, Marcus unfolded the paper. As he read the contents, his eyes widened in disbelief. The list wasn't just long, it was bizarre, demanding, and in some cases, genuinely frightening. This is, Marcus began, then stopped. Some of these things, I don't understand how they're related to what happened today. Morrison leaned back in his chair. Every item on that list is designed to teach you something about respect, humility, and consequences. Some are simple acts of service. Others are more challenging. Marcus read through the list again, his mind reeling. How long do I have to decide? You have until tomorrow morning, Morrison replied, standing up from his chair. Sleep on it, Mr. Williams. Think carefully about what kind of man you want to be when you leave this country. As Morrison moved toward the door, Marcus called out desperately, Wait! What if I can't do all of these things? What if some of them are impossible? The guard paused at the door and looked back. Then I suppose you'll discover just how creative the British legal system can be when dealing with tourists who assault royal guards. With that, he was gone, leaving Marcus alone with the list and the growing realization that his simple vacation prank had evolved into something far more complex and dangerous than he had ever imagined. Marcus spent the entire night in his hotel room staring at the list that Sergeant Morrison had given him. The paper had become wrinkled from his nervous handling, and he had read each item so many times he could recite them from memory. Some demands seemed straightforward enough. Write formal apology letters, perform community service, make charitable donations. But others were deeply personal and disturbing in ways he couldn't fully understand. Item number 7 haunted him the most. Spend 1 full day standing motionless in Trafalgar Square, allowing passers-by to treat you as you treated me. The thought of subjecting himself to the same kind of humiliation he had inflicted on the guard made his stomach churn. When morning came, Marcus knew he had no real choice. The alternative was criminal prosecution, deportation, and the complete destruction of his reputation and career back home. He called Detective Collins and agreed to meet Morrison's conditions. I have to warn you, Mr. Williams, the detective said when he delivered his decision. Sergeant Morrison has a reputation for being thorough. If you've agreed to his terms, you'd better be prepared to follow through completely. The first few tasks were manageable, if expensive. Marcus donated $5,000 to a military charity, wrote heartfelt apology letters to the Palace Guards Regiment, and spent 2 days volunteering at a homeless shelter in East London. The work was harder than he expected, and he found himself genuinely moved by the stories of the people he met. But as the list progressed, the demands became increasingly strange and personal. Morrison required Marcus to research and write detailed essays about the history of the Royal Guards, the significance of ceremonial duties, and the psychological impact of public humiliation. Each essay had to be exactly 2,000 words and demonstrate genuine understanding and remorse. It was during the writing of his third essay that Marcus began to suspect Morrison was watching him. He had chosen to work in a small cafe near his hotel, and twice he noticed a familiar figure in military bearing sitting at tables across the street. When he looked directly, the person was always gone, but the feeling of being observed never left him. The confirmation came on day 6 of his ordeal. Marcus was completing item number 12, standing outside the Tower of London in a handwritten sign reading, "I disrespected a royal guard and I am deeply sorry," when Morrison approached him directly. "How are you finding the experience, Mr. Williams?" the guard asked, appearing beside him as if from thin air. Marcus was exhausted, humiliated, and running dangerously low on money. The past week had been the most challenging of his life, but it had also been strangely educational. "It's been eye-opening," he admitted. "Good," Morrison replied. "We're getting to the important part now." Marcus looked down at the list in his pocket. He was only halfway through the demands, and the remaining items were the ones that had kept him awake at night. "About item number 7. "Tomorrow," Morrison said firmly. "Trafalgar Square, 9 in the morning. You'll stand in the center by Nelson's column for 8 hours. No food, no water, no bathroom breaks. Just like a real guard duty." The next morning was gray and drizzly, typical London weather that seemed to match Marcus's mood. He positioned himself in Trafalgar Square as instructed, wearing a sign around his neck that Morrison had provided. This one was even more detailed than the previous signs. "I am learning what it means to be still and respectful. Please help me understand by treating me as I treated a royal guard." The first few hours were merely uncomfortable. Tourists took pictures, some laughing, others looking confused or sympathetic. But as the day wore on and word spread through social media, the crowd grew larger and more aggressive. People began shouting at him, making jokes, and a few even threw things: paper cups, coins, even someone's leftover sandwich. Marcus forced himself to remain still, thinking about Morrison's unwavering composure as hot coffee dripped down his face. Every insult thrown his way was a reminder of his own thoughtless behavior. Every moment of humiliation was a lesson in empathy he had never expected to receive. Around hour 6, something shifted. The crowd had grown to nearly 100 people, but instead of mockery, many were now showing concern. An elderly woman brought him a bottle of water, though he couldn't drink it without breaking his commitment. A group of teenagers who had initially come to laugh ended up staying to defend him from more aggressive hecklers. "Why are you doing this?" one young man asked. Marcus, still maintaining his position, replied carefully, "Because I hurt someone who didn't deserve it, and I need to understand what that felt like for him." When evening finally arrived and Morrison appeared to release him from his vigil, Marcus was soaked from rain, exhausted beyond measure, but strangely changed. The experience had stripped away layers of casual cruelty he hadn't even realized he possessed. "One more task," Morrison said as they walked away from the square. "The most important one." Marcus looked at the list. Item number 20, the final demand, simply read, "Understand." "What does that mean?" Marcus asked. Morrison led him to a quiet pub nearby, where they sat in a corner booth away from other patrons. For the first time since their initial meeting, the guard seemed to relax slightly. "Tell me what you've learned," Morrison said. Marcus thought carefully before answering. "I learned that what I did wasn't just a prank. It was cruel. I turned you into an object for my own entertainment, without thinking about your feelings or dignity as a person." "Go on." "I learned that actions have consequences that ripple out in ways we can't always predict. My stupid joke could have cost me my job, my reputation, my freedom. But more than that, it hurt someone who was just doing his duty." Morrison nodded. "And what else?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I learned that I don't want to be the kind of person who hurts others for a laugh. The people who helped me today in Trafalgar Square, who showed me kindness when they didn't have to, that's who I want to be like." The guard reached into his jacket and pulled out an official-looking document. "Your charges have been dropped, Mr. Williams. You're free to return home whenever you choose." Marcus felt a wave of relief so intense he nearly cried. "Thank you." I know I don't deserve this second chance. Everyone deserves a chance to become better than they were, Morrison replied. The question is what you do with that opportunity. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two men who had been adversaries but were now something approaching understanding. Can I ask you something? Marcus said finally. Why did you help me? You could have just let the law take its course. Morrison smiled for the first time since Marcus had met him. Because I saw something in your eyes after you threw that coffee. You weren't proud of what you'd done. You were shocked by your own behavior. That told me you weren't truly cruel, just thoughtless. Cruelty can't be taught away, but thoughtlessness can. Marcus flew home to Chicago 3 days later, but he was not the same person who had left 2 weeks earlier. He kept in touch with several people he had met during his community service work and continued supporting the military charity with regular donations. He also deleted the video of his encounter with Morrison without ever posting it online. 6 months later, Marcus received a package with no return address. Inside was a formal photograph of the Royal Guards at Buckingham Palace, signed by the entire regiment. On the back, in Morrison's precise handwriting, were the words, "Respect earned is respect returned. Well done." Marcus framed the photograph and hung it in his office, where it served as a daily reminder that every person deserves dignity and every action carries weight we might not immediately understand. His colleagues often asked about the picture, and Marcus would tell them it was a reminder of an important lesson he learned while traveling. He never told them the full story, but sometimes, late at night, he would think about that moment in Trafalgar Square when strangers showed him kindness he didn't deserve. He thought about Morrison's patience and wisdom in turning a moment of thoughtless cruelty into an opportunity for genuine growth. Most importantly, he never forgot the look in Morrison's eyes that day at the palace. Not anger or hatred, but disappointment in humanity's capacity for casual cruelness. And he promised himself he would spend the rest of his life ensuring that no one would ever see that look directed at him again.